afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Brown Bag Lecture. My name is Chandra, and I work for the Penticton Museum. And you've got the right place if you're here to hear about KVR. Okay, good. Make sure you got that right. I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Okanagan people. And as myself, I'm a biologist by training. I'm enjoying seeing all the little sprouts, daffodils coming up, and the chickadees are starting to sing, and I've even seen signs of worms. So spring is coming, and I'm looking forward to that. Now, a few housekeeping things. If you have a cell phone, now is a great time to turn it off or put it on to silent. I'll try and remember to remind you to turn it back on. If you need to leave by chance, we have a couple different ways you can leave. If it's an emergency, please nobody start a fire. If it's an emergency though, you can leave by this way. There is an emergency exit behind that screen, and I have a bunch of people who are standing right in the way of the emergency exit. So this is your
first ones out the door.
You will be the first ones to open the open the screen so we can get out the door. Right? This is like getting on the plane and you've got the comfy seat with the big space, so this is your responsibility. The other one is the exit is out through that way. I've been doing this for about 10 years. Knock on wood, we won't have any emergency because we haven't yet, but just in case. If you do need to leave and you don't want to make a big fuss, you can always sneak out through that door. There's a guy standing right in the doorway. He's got his coffee and his phone. So you can sneak out that way. There's a quieter door, and you don't make that big much of a fuss. Or you just go to the door that has the sign with the no smoking sign. Yeah, Sarah, this is a great time to take a photo if you haven't done so already. Because we are probably, well, where's Dennis? He's outside. Our capacity of this space is supposed to be like 140 or so, and I think we're getting there. But I don't know if we could squeeze any more people in. Although it would be lovely,
absolutely,
to bring more people in because we have John Cowan here. You know, because that's why you're here. And John is a recent retiree to Penticton, but he has lots of experience with trains and spent time in 1984 here working for the Kettle Valley Railway. And so you were a conductor.
Yep.
Okay. And then worked other places as well as a conductor. So John is going to share his experiences and his knowledge about the trains, about Kettle Valley Railway with us, and in an area that we don't often hear about, which is like the later years of the Kettle Valley Railway. So looking forward to it, as I'm sure everybody else here is. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thank you, Chandra. First question I have, y'all like trains? Yeah. What a silly question. Of course, that's why you're here, for the trains. Before we get going, though, I do want to clarify one thing. Some of you have been looking at this weird shirt I'm wearing, and I just want you to know I bought this at a gift shop at the Strasburg Railway in Pennsylvania in 2019. It's a tourist railroad, similar to the Kettle Valley Steam Railroad. They run steam trains. They've been doing it for a lot longer, and they also run freight. And I bought this shirt in the gift shop. I thought this looks really cool. But then when I got it back home, where am I going to be able to wear this shirt without people thinking, well, you look really weird wearing a shirt like this? So I hardly ever wear it, but I thought today, what a great opportunity. I can actually take it out of the closet and wear it. And also, too, you're probably thinking, well, if he was a conductor on the railroad, he must have uniforms. And I do. I have all my conductor's uniforms from 30 years ago, but I got to let you know a little secret, but keep it between us, you and I. Since I retired, I put on a few pounds, and I can't fit them. But I want to wear this today to illustrate to you that this is sort of replicate what a passenger conductor's uniform looked like. You know, with the tie, pocket watch, brass buttons, vest, and so on. So I thought I would wear it. So I want to get that out of the way. So, okay. So anyway, I do love trains. I've loved trains ever since the day I can remember. Oh, there we are. So I grew up That's me. I grew up in Port Hope, Ontario, 60 miles east of Toronto, and I had my first ride behind a steam locomotive on June 20th, 1964, on a CNR steam locomotive between Toronto and Belleville. I don't know how many are from Ontario, know the area. It went through Lindsay and Peterborough, and after that day, at age 7, I fell in love with steam locomotives, and even though I missed the era of steam, which ended on about 1960, I've managed since 1964 to ride behind well in excess of 100 steam locomotives in 5 different continents. I drove a steam locomotive in Cuba in 2015. I went to Poland in 2018, and I drove for 10 days coal-burning steam engines on regular passenger trains, firing them, driving them, making stops, let people on and off with a Polish engineer and fireman telling me what to do in Polish. If I screwed up, I got chewed out in Polish. If I screwed up too many times in a day, I had to buy him a bottle of vodka. At the end of the day, I had to do that twice. So I did that. And then during my time at Canadian Pacific, CP paid me 5 times to be a conductor on 2 different steam engines. Royal Hudson 2860 from Vernon to Sycamoose in 1979, and 4 trips on the 2816, which they operate now. So that's that. So then, that's me when I was 10 years old. I also knew a lot of the train crews would take me for train rides. You know, think about this. The 1960s and into the early 70s was a great time to grow up because you were allowed to grow up and do things, without any problem. And, a lot of these old timers, they took me for rides on the trains, and it was really good for me because a lot of these guys came through the Depression. They were war veterans, and they taught me a level of work ethic that isn't quite the same today, so that really helped. So this was in Peterborough. I was 10 years old. This was in December 1967. The engineer, I'd ridden with him before. My grandparents lived in Peterborough, about 8 blocks from the CN station. So the engineer, his name was Clayton Hodson, and he was going to let me ride with him in December of 67. I had my first camera that Santa Claus had allegedly got brought for me the year before, and so they all called me Johnny. So when I was climbing up on the engine, I said, Johnny, let me take your picture before you get in the engine. So I have that picture just to illustrate how train crazy I was. Then I used to ride other trains, way freights. When I lived in Port Hope, there was a way freight as a short little freight train that would go and switch all the industries along these busy main lines, so the mammoth 100-car freight trains don't have to do it, block public crossings. They take the cars back to a big terminal, then they get marshaled onto bigger trains to go wherever they need to go. So there was this way freight that went from Toronto to Cobourg, Ontario, which was east of where I went, and it was a 4-man crew. And they all called me Johnny too. And one guy on there, he was a trainman, and his name was Len. And there's a reason I'm telling you this. Okay, so then fast forward to 1977, I hired on as a train order operator working in the train stations in Ottawa, around the Ottawa Valley, and then 8 months in Montreal. I wore glasses since I was 17. I had a stigma problem in my left eye. That wasn't a problem for being a train order operator, but when I wanted to become a train conductor, it was a huge problem because Transport Canada had this, in case you're not aware, CP and CN being federally regulated, they were mandated and regulated by Transport Canada. They couldn't do things on their own, and Transport Canada had this silly rule that they couldn't hire people to work on trains even if the glasses gave them 20/20 vision, so I shouldn't have gotten on. But I did have a chance to come out to Revelstoke in '78 to be a trainman. But I had to pass an eye test. Well, this car here, car 67, it's a heavyweight coach, and you're probably wondering, why is he telling us this? We came to hear about the Kettle Valley. Who cares about his eye test? You need to listen to this. If you just bear with me, because this day could have gone a different way, and I wouldn't be here today. So I had to go through an eye test. This was the tail end of an era when railways would have heavyweight coaches like this, and they would use them for dentists, classrooms, eye tests, and they go to remote terminals, particularly up in northern Ontario. And this was the very last era. By 1978, CP had 2 of these cars left. They called them the I car. They had one for the east and one for the western provinces. This was the eastern one. It happened to be in Smiths Falls, where I hired on, which was 40 miles south of Ottawa. So I had to go and do my eye test. He was like an optometrist, and I couldn't read the bottom line of the chart because of my stigma. And I had glasses, but I didn't let him know that. He wouldn't pass me, and I said, come on, this is ridiculous. I said, there's nothing wrong with my eyes. I said, the lighting in this car is terrible. He wouldn't budge, so I got mad, and I left in a huff. So this Len, the fellow I was telling you about before, that worked on that Cobourg turn in the 60s, By 1978, he went into management, and he was the assistant superintendent in Kamloops, so I had a connection with him. So I went across the tracks up to his office on the second floor, and he was there, and I went in and I said, hey Len, can I have a word with you? Come on in, John, what's up? Well, I said, I just went to the ICAR and I failed my eye test. And he said, well, what do you want me to do about it? And I said, come on, Len, that's ridiculous. There's not, the lighting in that car is terrible. I mean, remember, I'm lying like crazy because I did wear glasses. And he said, so he's taken the company's position at first. So to make a long story short, we're kind of arguing back and forth within reason, because he's still a manager, for 20 minutes. And I was running out of straws to draw from, and it just popped out. I said, what would Don Vlad, Paul Fitzgerald, Andy Strawn think if they knew you weren't helping me? And these were the guys he worked with on that job 10 years earlier. And they were all buddies, and there was that camaraderie back in those days. And he just sat there for 10 seconds. I thought, what did I just do? And then he looked at me and said, okay, John, go home and phone me at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. So I phoned him up next morning and said, you might have a point, John, about the lighting in that car. I'm willing to get him to retest you in a well room in the station. Can you come? I said, yes, I'll be there this morning at 10 o'clock. So I came down and he did that. So I kid you not, the eye examiner basically just turned his back, Mr. Cowan, read the bottom line of the chart, A-E-I-O-U, you passed. So a friend of mine at the coast, who's a retired locomotive engineer, he said, only you, Cowan, only you would never take no for an answer. Anybody else would just walk away and do something else. But I said, yeah, but look at it. If I hadn't been persistent and that personal connection I had with Len when I was a kid, I wouldn't have had another 34 years on the railroad. That's why I'm telling you this story, because if it wasn't for my persistence, I wouldn't be here to tell you this today. So that's the reason. Thank you. So yeah, so that was this was car 67, and it was a heavyweight car. Okay, let's move on. Okay, oh, I went too far, I think. Okay, it stays there. Okay, so thanks to Len, then I transferred out to Revelstoke, and I worked in Revelstoke for 17 months, which allowed me to work CP's, the Canadian passenger train. I worked freight to Field, to Kamloops, and down to Kelowna many times in 1979. But I couldn't get used to a small town again after living in Ottawa. I don't know how many of you know Revelstoke. It's a small town. You know, everybody knows your business. You can't blow your nose without the whole town knowing about it. I couldn't get used to that again, so I transferred to Vancouver in 1979, and that was my home base till I retired in 2012. But like Chandra said, I took a lot of temporary work in other terminals. I went over to Vancouver Island many times in the 90s. I went to Nelson in 1993, and I came to Penticton in 1984 to take some work here. So how does this thing go here? Oh, I went too far. Oh. Okay, this map's pretty small, isn't it? Let's go to the next one here. Okay. Where's that red light, Chandra? Oh, here it is. Oh, thank you. There it is. Okay, so yeah. So here's Penticton here. Okay, what was the start of the end of the Kettle Valley Railroad was in 1959 when CP decided to abandon between Hope and Brody, just down the hill from Brookmere. Why did CP abandon that? It was high up in the mountains. They had a lot of problems with avalanches, snow slides, trains got stranded. So that was the start of the end of it. Up to that point, the KVR was a secondary main line, if you will. They had one freight train a day. They had a daily passenger train, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But that was the start of the end of it. So then, when that got abandoned, then they had to run from Princeton to Brookmere. See, this is the part that got abandoned, Brody to Hope. So then they went up, they had to run all the way up to Spence's Bridge and then down. And they tried that with the passenger train for a while up till 1961, and that just didn't work. So that changed everything. So, okay. So this is a picture in, I just should say too, my main focus today is the latter years of the KVR. I'm just showing you a few photos here for a tease. Other historians have covered turn of the century. Did any of you here in Penticton know the late Joe Schmuen? Yeah, Joe was a good friend of mine. He was a career railroader as well, and he was a real Kettle Valley fan, and he published 2 books before he passed away. But Joe focused on the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm doing the tail end here, but I just want to show you these as a teaser. This is the yard of Penticton in the 60s. These locomotives are called sea-liners. They were quite common here. Now, this is a through passenger train on the Trout Creek Bridge where the Kettle Valley Steam Railroad runs today. This would have taken some time in the 50s. When I worked out of Vancouver, I worked with a conductor on the Canadian, Via's Canadian, that he used to work this train in the 50s. And how they arranged that was the locomotive engineers from Penticton would only go as far as Brookmere. The Vancouver engineers would go to Brookmere on the same train. But they had an agreement that, because we trainmen and conductors could work 2 subdivisions. I did that on Via for 10 years from Vancouver to Kamloops, but they had a different agreement here. So for 6 months of the year, talking about trainmen and conductors, two Penticton crews and 1 Vancouver crew would man the train, and the other 6 months it would reverse. It would be 2 Vancouver crews and 1 Penticton crew. So a conductor I worked with out of Vancouver worked this, as well as a conductor that I worked out of here, out of Penticton. You're going to see his picture in a minute. He also worked the train in the 50s too. So the train went from Vancouver to Hope through Penticton, Midway, Nelson, Cranbrook, Lethbridge, and up to Medicine Hat. That's the way that train ran. So then, by 1960, they had downgraded the train, if you will. But the Budd Company in Philadelphia had built these stainless steel trains called Budd cars or rail diesel cars. And railroads all around North America bought them in droves. Why? Because they could run cheaper trains, less crew, less amenities, and if they wanted to get rid of a passenger service, what better way than to have these? So this is what they did here in Penticton with these Budd cars. And they're all but gone now. The only place they operate today is between Sudbury and White River in Ontario, because it's a remote area. So this is at the Penticton station. This could very well have been the last trip where they had 2 Budd cars because a group wanted to ride the last run to Rock Creek. I'm not sure about that, but yeah, this is at the Penticton station here again. Okay, and this is the yard as it looked in the 50s in Penticton. And it really hadn't changed much when I came here in 1984, with the exception of a few yard tracks here. But this was the roundhouse here, this is the yard here, the turntable was here, and this is where the river is. The bridge over the river's gone today. And this is what we call a Y, not spelled W-H-Y, W-Y-E. And so this was the junction for the line down to Osuia. So if they wanted to turn an engine or a train, they could come down here, back around this way and go that way and see how they're turned. So basically this stayed intact most of the yard till they abandoned in 1989. So this was an excursion train. The Okanagan Express was called. It was operated in 1983 and 1984 on an excursion with a group called the National Railroad Historical Association. And I rode this train as a passenger in 1983 on the May long weekend, not realizing I'd have an opportunity to work here the following year. But I wanted to ride the line. So this was at the CP station in Vancouver prior to departure. And this was the first passenger train to come here since the last train was made its last run in January 1964. This is at the station in Vancouver still. And this is at Spence's Bridge, where we just branched off the main line and we're going what they call the Princeton subdivision that CP operates. And this was at Brookmere. They did photo stops there. Brookmere was a very busy terminal, an active place in the steam era. They had engineers and firemen based there for pusher service because there was a lot of grades. And of course that water tower for watering the steam engines. That water tower is still there today. It was preserved. There it is again. And the reason there's 2 spouts was because when the Kettle Valley was built, it was built with CPR and the Great Northern Railroad had a say in it. So the Great Northern owned one water spout, the CP the other. Still at Brookmere. Now, this is the Penticton station. This station hadn't seen this kind of beehive activity since the last train left in 1964. It was really, we arrived at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. It was getting dark, and there's a big band that came out to greet us, and this was just with diesels, not a steam engine. I think the whole town of Penticton was out. I thought that was amazing. And that's in front of the yard now. I imagine most of you know that the station is still there today. I think it's a daycare center, if I'm not mistaken, and it's on Hastings Avenue, I believe, just west of Fairview. Oh, let me go back here. Okay, how many of you like before and after shots? Okay, this was taken in May 1983. This was taken at the same spot in 2019. Look at the difference, hey? You never know there's a railroad there. So On the weekend, they ran trips to Princeton back, and I went with some other people, chased it in a car. This was on the Jura Hill, just up above Princeton. This is at the station in Princeton, which many of you probably know is a Subway restaurant. If you ever stop for a sandwich in Princeton, that's the old train station. Oh, back in Penticton. So glad I took all these photos when I was here. There's the turntable. They could turn the engines that way. A lot of railroads had them where the roundhouse was. That's the roundhouse there where they maintain steam engines and diesels. When I came, they had a couple of gentlemen from the car department that maintained the box cars mainly. So this was our train. This was the caboose I'd ride in. So the assignment I was on, and I should mention, up until 1983, the CP had 2 crews here. One crew went to Okanagan Falls, did the other work, and the other crew went 3 times a week. They'd go on duty at 5 p.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and work all the way to Spence's Bridge. And I used to, when I was working on Via's Canadian at the time, we had an overnight run from Vancouver to Kamloops, and we'd go through Spence's Bridge without stopping around 3 in the morning. I didn't see them every day, but a number of times I'd be sitting up in the dome. We go through Spence's Bridge, and they'd be coming in around the corner off the Princeton sub into the Spence's Bridge yard. And so, but in 1984, or late 83, they decided to change it and just have the one crew go to Merritt twice a week. I must have been a cost-saving reason why they did that. And go to Princeton on Mondays and back. Tuesdays and Thursdays go to Merritt, overnight in a motel, come back. And that meant the job had weekends off. So it was very enticing for me to come up here. And I got to tell you, I'm so glad I did, because a year later, 1985, CP closed Penticton as a terminal. And all the people that worked there basically lost their jobs or got relocated, and they relocated one crew, abolished one crew and relocated another crew to Merritt. So it's a good thing I took that opportunity when I did. This is the caboose I would ride into Merritt. You can't replicate this photo today because the station's still there, but I wouldn't be able to go out there because of all the condo buildings. Now, I got to tell you about this story here. Gentleman on the left, Cable Freeman, was my conductor. Anybody who's been here a long time, did you know Cable before he passed away? Anybody? And the gentleman on the right, his name was Fred Bradburn. And he was a carman, he was one of the last, worked in the car department. He repaired any of the railway cars, and he would give our train a brake test before we'd leave the yard. So one day, I got to tell you, I think it was my 3rd week here, I was telling the engineer how many cars to back up to the caboose. We're backing our train onto the caboose, and that was my job. I'd say, okay, 10 cars, 5 cars to a joint meaning coupling up, not the other kind of joint. And so we would, but then I don't know if I was daydreaming or looking at the hills of Penticton, and I wasn't really giving him the car counts I should have. He was going faster than we had room for. So I finally said, stop, stop, stop. So we plowed into the caboose, bypassed the drawbars. The knuckle, or the coupler, was completely wrecked, and the drawbar was bent a bit. So Fred had to do all this repair. And Fred was a kind gentleman, and like to him, he should have been upset, but he didn't. Oh, it's all a day's work, it's no big deal. Cable Freeman, on the other hand, he was just livid with me. And I should have known better. I was very embarrassed. But why was he mad? He was with CP for 40 years. He was actually the last guy on the original Kettle Valley seniority list. And he had a routine. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we go to work at 11 o'clock, be there on time, go into the office, get our train orders, walk over to the yard. The engineer would fire up the locomotives. We doubled our cars together. The other crew bought up the cars from OK Falls. And he wanted to be gone by 11:45. He allowed 45 minutes to do it. When I did this thing where I really made a mess, that delayed us another good 45 minutes. Well, you know why he was mad? Because he had it all figured out. We leave at 11:45. It's 25 mile an hour all the way to Merritt. He allowed 30 minutes for us to stop at Princeton to pick up the loads that the other crew pulled from the Weyerhaeuser mill the day before. And he wanted to be in off duty by 6 o'clock so he could go check into a motel and go to the bar, have a couple of beers. And I screwed him up for that. He was so mad. So all the way up the hill, after we left, I was up in the cupola of the caboose, the high part you saw there, and he was on the other side. He lectured me all the way up the hill to Summerland. And then I remember where the Kettle Valley Steam Railroad runs today, they go by where the station used to be, the Summerland station. Then they go around a sharp curve, and then they go around a horseshoe before they come out where all the vineyards are. And we're going around this curve, I'll never forget. And he said, I think maybe you should go back and go back to trainman training. Well, I felt that low, and I wanted to be 1,000 miles away. But I deserved it, I took it. But think about these old timers. They would give you heck, and diplomacy wasn't always part of the vocabulary. Trust me, there was a lot of old timers I worked with that were much tougher than cable, but the thing was, it was forgotten. So before I move on, though, I want to just diverge for a minute here. Fred Bradburn worked here. The Bradburn family was a very big railroad family here in the 50s. And when word got out that I was coming to Penticton to work this assignment, all my co-workers and peers in Vancouver couldn't understand, why is Cowan going up to Penticton? He's on the passenger train, that's his love. Why is he going to Penticton? Guys couldn't figure it out. Well, there was a guy by the name of George Bradburn, who was a locomotive engineer out of Coquitlam, and he worked the freight trains from Coquitlam to North Bend, and I worked with him many, many times. And when he heard I was coming up here to take this temporary assignment, and I was looking for a place to stay, he phoned our crew clerks at Coquitlam. They're the guys who would call the crews at home to go out on a train. And he said, can I get John Cowan's phone number? So they gave it to him, and he called me at home and said, John, I hear you're going up to Penticton and to work a temporary assignment, need a place to stay? And I said, yeah, why do you ask? Well, my sister-in-law takes in boarders because she was married to my brother, who was a locomotive engineer, and he sadly died of a heart attack, I believe, in 1970. And so you'd be a good fit. You don't smoke. You're not a partier. You okay? Could I arrange it? I'd love it, George. Thank you. So I really, really appreciated that. So her name was Annie, and she was a very nice lady, and she took very good care of me. And even when my car broke down in Princeton on a Sunday night, well, I'll get to that a little later, but she was very good. And so then fast forward to 2024. I moved to Penticton, and I joined the Penticton Adventures Hiking Club. My first hike on a Sunday, there's a lady walking ahead of me, and we got talking, and we didn't exchange names, and I told her I worked for the railroads. Oh, my dad worked on the KVR, and he died of a heart attack on the job. Well, it's stupid me, it didn't click with me. The following Sunday, it went right over my head. The following Sunday, I went out again on a hike with the club, and she was out there again. And I said, by the way, what's your name? I said, my name's John Cowan. My name's Barb Bradburn. And I said, are you any relation to George Bradburn, who worked in Vancouver? That's my uncle. You're kidding me. Well, so guess what? I realized the light bulb came on, and I realized it was Barb's mother, Annie, that I stayed with. And guess what? Here's Barb right now. Barb, stand up. And then here we have Bob Bradburn, who's George's son. And I'm so grateful to your dad for what you did. And then this young lady here is Gertie. She's Fred's wife. Fred sadly passed away in 2016. We're very sorry for your loss, but she's here today with your two lovely daughters. I really appreciate that. And Barb's brother is here. So, I just want to get personal here for a minute, that having you, the Bradburns, here today is very personal to me, because you might think, well, why? But how kind your family was as a family unit. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, I didn't do anything for you. Well, directly, that's probably true, but indirectly, you did. Your dad was a huge impact for me for a place to stay. Your mother, Barb, she treated me very well. And Fred, again, going back to this story here, Fred's the one that should have been jumping up and down and yelling at me and screaming at me, but he just took it all in stride. He was such a nice man the whole time I was there. So to the Bradburns, thank you very much. And thank you for coming. So that's me. I think my first or second trip, 1984. That's Cable on the left. Now, Cable, like I said, he got mad at me that day. A week later, I went home to Burnaby on the weekend, and I was driving back on a Sunday evening to be in position to go to work Monday morning at 7 o'clock. I stopped in Princeton to have dinner at a Dixie Lee Chicken that they used to have. They had one in Revelstoke, one in Princeton. And I had a car where the starters went a lot. It was an Acadian, not a very good car. My starter went. I couldn't get it going. I had to have a BCA car my tow to a garage where the guy couldn't get a starter from Chilliwack till the Tuesday. And I was in a panic mode. How am I going to get to Penticton? Well, there was a Greyhound bus at midnight. And so I was able to take the bus, but I had to phone Barb's mom, Annie, and say, look, I'm not going to get to your place till 2 o'clock in the morning. How will I get in? I didn't have a key. Well, that's okay, John. I'll leave you a key somewhere. So Cable, even though he was really annoyed with me the week before, they had my car ready on Tuesday, but when we come back Wednesday, I asked the other trainman, who was from Kamloops, if he would give me a ride out to Princeton after we got to Penticton, get my car, and I'll pay for the gas. He said he would. Well, Cable really surprised me. This was a guy that was worried about, he was always worried about the assistant superintendent from Kamloops, Ed Bay. His nickname was Muggsy Bay, being around any tree, around any corner with a radar gun to catch us speeding. He had 40 years on the railroad. I don't know why he cared. But this one day, he just shocked me. When we stopped at Princeton to set off the empty bulkhead flats for the mill that the other crew would spot, the head end crew would do that, the engineer and the head end trainman. I was too far back, so I stayed in the caboose with Cable. Cable came over to me, he said, "Are you a good driver?" I said, "Well, I like to think so. Why do you ask?" He said, "Well, it's against my better judgment, but I'll get Swifty." The engineer, his name was Ron Swift, but he said, we called him Swifty. And so I'll get Swifty to slow down when the caboose goes, the track crossed the highway just west of where that bridge is in Princeton today, where the river is, and that the garage was on the left. I'll get Swifty to drop you off and get your car. But he said, "I don't want you driving to the station in Penticton." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, Muggsy might be there. And he'll see you there and you're not on the train. That would look bad with the old rules. But well, what do you want me to do then?" He said, "Well, you can go 60 miles an hour. We can only do 25. Go up to the Trout Creek Bridge where the Kettle Valley Steamer turns today and wait for us there." So I got up there. I had to wait a good 2 hours for them. And then when the train slowed down, I hopped on the caboose, went into Penticton. Muggsy Bay was not anywhere to be found. But the trainman was a lot happier to take me up to Summerland and all the way to Princeton. But I always thought what a great guy Cable was. I mean, he was sore as heck at me the week before, and then everything was good. That's the way those guys were, and I had never forgot him for doing that favor for me. So here we are in Penticton again with another shot with the turntable. Okay, so this is along Otter Lake, north of Tuolumne. So that was basically the bulk of our train. It was mostly lumber and sometimes the odd tank car. There was a place that CP delivered propane to, we would do. And sadly, these gondola cars just ahead of the caboose, that was the start of the end of this line, because they were already starting to tear tracks up in the yard in Penticton in 1984, and I think they took the rail over to Vancouver Island, even though the line still had 5 years of life left. But beautiful along there, Otter Lake. Station in Merritt. I understand the station has been preserved but moved, and I'm not really sure where. Station in Merritt. So this is be in the morning. Now this is south of Merritt. The Coquihalla Highway wasn't there then, but it'd be up on the hill today. And this would be around Kingsvale, where it was fairly flat. The line was fairly flat, a valley along there. We used to have a lot of problems with cattle getting through fences that were broken. A few times the engineer would have to bring the train, sometimes mostly to a control stop, but a couple times he put the train to emergency, and then he called back to Cable, say, "Oh, we almost hit a cow," so he put the train to emergency. We don't want to hit anything. It was very nice along there with the mountains. I believe that bridge is still there today, but no track. And this flat car here, it was a flat car exactly like this one here that had a long drawbar. That was the car. And I'm not blaming the flat car, I'm blaming myself, that when we had that mishap with the caboose, it was one of these cars with a long drawbar. If it had been just a bulkhead flat, it might not have happened. But anyway, can't make excuses for my carelessness. And I think boxcars were a rarity by that time. I think this boxcar would have been OCS, meaning on company service for the maintenance away tools or things that the roadmaster required, because, as I say, we handled very few boxcars on the line when I was there. Although CP was using the Princeton subdivision to store 40-foot boxcars in a lot of places. A place called Manning was a siding where they stored a lot. And every 2 or 3 weeks we'd have to stop there, cut our engines off, tie onto these boxcars in the yard, cut the air in, and pump up the air, and then we just move the cars back and forth so the wheels would go completely around just to lubricate everything, and then put them back in the siding, put handbrakes on, cut off, tie onto our train and go. So that's the only other time we handled boxcars when I was there. And this bridge is just down, up to the right, not very far up, would be the Larson Hill, where the Coquihalla Highway is today. And from what I understand, I don't know if that bridge is still there, but I understand they had some very major washouts along this section, and it's all gone today. It's very sad. This is at Brookmere, the water tower, as I say, it's still there. I took this from the back of the caboose as we were going by. There's the station in Princeton on one of our Monday Princeton turns. Having a lunch break. But no Subway sandwich there. No Subway there then. Certainly glad I took all these photos. Okay, so yeah, so this is in Merritt, or pardon me, in Princeton. We just set off some cars and we're ready to couple on and go. So I took this shot and then got on the caboose and off we went to Penticton. So this was on a Monday, and the reason I could tell you that, Cable always hated it when we had to handle a tank car because with the dangerous commodity rules, it was propane, we were restricted to 15 miles an hour while handling tank cars on the Princeton subdivision. So if there was a tank car to go, Cable always wanted to take it over to Princeton on a Monday, leave it there, so that on Tuesday, when we come with all the bulkhead flats to go to Merritt, and then, which would go on to Spencer's Bridge, we could do 25 miles an hour to Princeton, and then have this car on to the rest of the way, which really slowed our trip up. Thankfully, we didn't get them every day, maybe 2 or 3 times a month. And this is in Princeton. We're just leaving, and the other crew had come over to do, we'd set the cars off, and then the other crew would take them up to the mill because we wouldn't have time because of the length of our trip. So this is east of the station in Princeton, and those are the some cars there, and this crew is going to handle them. If you look over to the right, you're supposed to look at the trains, but look at the price of gas. 40 cents a liter. Can you imagine? I apologize if I have my back to you here, folks. I just have to look up here. So yeah, we're leaving. That's the trainman on the other crew. He's going to line the switch. He had to wait for us to get out of the way. So we're heading to Penticton here. Now here we're going up the Jura Loop. It was quite an interesting configuration. It was like 2 or 3 loops going up this big hill so they could get up to the top. When we were coming west, by railroad rules for that subdivision, we had to stop the train before going down that hill, and we had to do a standing brake test to make sure the brakes were working so we wouldn't have a runaway. But going up the hill, it was not a problem. Hard to believe I got paid to do this. And this is just up above the Jura loops. We're get into more of a treat area. You know, it's great being in a caboose and we call those the cubelow. It's like a dome car for a freight train. Now, you all like before and after photos? Yes? Okay. I took this photo. This is up near just west of Faldner. I took this in March 1984 from the caboose. And I will be telling you more about a book I published, which I'll talk about later. But this picture is in a book I published during COVID. And so then after I moved here and I joined the Penticton Adventures Hiking Club, where I was fortunate enough to meet Barb Bradburn, they were going to do this 4-hour hike, carpool from Penticton to Faldner, and a 2-hour hike in each direction up to a place called Crump, named after Norris Crump, who was president of CPR in the 50s, who was the one that created the famous train, the Canadian. And so I wanted to find this curve again and replicate it. So there it is. The trees have grown up quite a bit, and there are members of the hiking club here today, and they're going to know I've kept it a secret, but what happened was, the lady I carpooled with, she said, "John, are you doing the whole trip today, or are you just going to do part of it?" I said, "I'm here for the duration." "Why?" "Okay, because if you're not going to take your car back." What I didn't understand was where they were going to do the turn. So I saw the curve, and then I didn't say anything, and we went another quarter of a mile, And then they stopped to have a drink of water and a granola bar. And I thought, at that point, we're all going back. And that's the mistake I made there. I didn't say anything to anybody. I'll just sneak back. I'll get a few photos. Then the members should be coming back pretty quick. No sign of them. Then I said, I better get going to catch up to them. And then 4 of them were coming back. And they said, that was Tony and 3 ladies. They said, are you coming back with us? I said, no, I'm going the other way. And they said, well, you better get going. They're way ahead of us. Oh, my goodness. I'll catch up to them. Well, I didn't catch up to them until we got up to Crump. And I'm scared of bears and cougars. And I'll tell you, I was having a huge meltdown walking by myself. All I could hear was the river on the left, Big Rock Bluff on the right. I was just worried a cougar would come down and get me at any time. I had no bear spray with me. I was making noises like a crazy person. Now you guys know about it. You can tell everybody in the club. But I survived. And I got this photo, so I'm so glad I did that. So this is what it looked like from the caboose, looking at the engine which only happened on Mondays when we just went to Princeton. Now, I'm sure that this is the last time a meet between 2 trains ever took place on the Princeton sub. As well, I was there. This on the left here is called a Sperry car. They're owned by an American company. What they do is the railroads, I think, rent them for $500 an hour. That's the going rate then. And they'd have Americans on. They would test the track, check for any rail defects, any kind of things like that. And that's why they were there. And so, have any of you here ever had regrets in life? You know, you wish you'd done something you didn't, you can't go back? Anybody? Anybody? Well, so we went into into Penticton. And when we got in there was a train order operator by the name of Mo Morrison. He was quite a character. He was a rail fan too. And he said to me, John, the Sperry car is going down to Okanagan Falls tomorrow and they need a pilot conductor. You're the senior guy. You're senior to the other guy who's going to give me a ride to get my car. Do you want it? Well, the silliest thing I did, I said no. Because instead of looking at the positive aspects, 10 miles of track, 10-mile-an-hour track, there'd be no other trains down there. What could happen? But I knew Muggsy Bay, the assistant superintendent from Kamloops, was going to be riding with us. But so I looked at the negative. I thought to myself, how can I pilot these Americans? I don't even know where the heck I'm going myself. And with Muggsy Bay being on there, I don't think I better do it. Well, that was the dumbest thing I ever did. The other train was just chomping at the bit. I hope Cowan doesn't take it, and I didn't. And I regret it to this day because I never got to ride all the way to Okanagan Falls by train, just by bike. So, but it is what it is. And there's the Sperry car again, SRS for Sperry Rail. And here we're coming into Penticton. I believe that's probably the bridge over there for where the channel is and where the highway is. We're coming in again. And if I seem to recall, there was some reason, there was one weekend when we did have to back our train down. We couldn't get into the estate yard, and I honestly don't remember why. They had what they called the South Yard out near the airport, because the track to OK Falls went down along there. And we had to back our train down there for the weekend. So I did get to ride that part of the line, and I can't remember the reason why. Okay, so the Kettle Valley Railroad is all but gone today, but there's 2 portions that remain today, still in existence. There's 9 miles of the Kettle Valley Steam Railway up nearby, and they run with this engine 3716, which is a CPR consolidation, which was built in 1912, the same year the Titanic sunk, and it had a very long career with CP, and then the BC government purchased it, and well, actually no, let me take that back. The city of Port Coquitlam purchased it. They wanted to have it on static display, and they called it the Port Coquitlam, and then they didn't do anything with it. So the BC government stepped in and bought it to use as a backup on BC Rail Steam program with the Royal Hudson 2860 on the runs from North Vancouver to Squamish. So she had an active career at BC Rail, and then when that all went sideways, when CN took over from BC Rail, and the Kettle Valley Steam Rail was looking for a bigger engine, they were able to bring it up here in different pieces and put back together by some people who really know what they're doing. So that was there. So this is at Trout Creek. A nice winter shot. I'm sure everybody's ridden this train. Yeah. I got to say good things about them because the crew was here today. Ron and Neil, the conductor, are good friends of mine. They're good, so I got to be careful what I say. But no, I'm just kidding. They're great guys. They love what they do. Nice winter shot. Okay, and the only other portion that still survives today is the Grand Forks Railway, which technically was part of the Kettle Valley Railroad. What had happened was there, when CP, they ran to Midway, I believe, till 1989, and then that got cut back to Grand Forks. So they were running a train from Nelson to Grand Forks. Another silly thing I did go to Nelson in 1993 to work a work train for 2 weeks to Spokane City and back, but I got called for a work train, an auxiliary train one day, and there was a guy who retired, was our general manager, and I actually worked with him when he was a conductor with me on a snowplow at a Revelstoke in 1978. His name was Mark Rickerby, and he got called to come out. It was an auxiliary train. There had been a derailment somewhere up country, so they wanted the Coquitlam auxiliary train that had the hook and the crane and all the stuff, and they had another one for Revelstoke, so they could clear the right of way so they get trains going through. So anyway, he said to me, as he was riding as a train master with me on the caboose, he said, "John, you know, you being a train fan, you should go up to Nelson. I think we're running our last train to Grand Forks in about 3 weeks. I could arrange with management for you to go up there and ride that train." Did I go? No, because I didn't want to lose any wages, and another mistake I made. But anyway, so the Grand Forks. So how CP was able to get out of this operation here, they had to. Transport Canada said, well, you better find alternate arrangements to get, you've got 3 big customers there, including Interfor, and they need to be serviced. So the CP made a deal with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad that had a line to come up from Fruitvale. And so that's what they did, and so it's a short line today. So they are still in existence. There was rumors abound that they had shut down last year. But before doing this presentation, I want to make sure I got all my facts straight. So I actually phoned Interfor Mill in Grand Forks about a month ago, talked to somebody in management there and told them why I was calling. Are you guys still running the rail service? Oh yeah, they're still running. And they interchanged with Omnitrax, who operates that line now from the US. So anyway, so this is part of the Kettle Valley that's still in existence today. And when I was there, they were operating that day, and I introduced myself as a retired conductor. So they let me ride with them. I signed a waiver release form, and I got to ride with them. So this track right here is part of the original main line. There's only about a mile of it here, and then they have an interchange that goes another 2 miles to hook up with the American Railroad. So this was part of what they call the boundary subdivision from Nelson to Midway. It's still in service as far as Castlegar today, and then nothing west of there. So, and this is what they go over, get lumber, cars, and bulkhead flats, similar to what I worked with out of Penticton in 84. And what a great way to end my presentation with the female engineer on there. She, very nice. I can't believe I thought I was going to go after my time, and I went through, I did pretty good. I'm proud of myself. So anyway, before you do go, if you have any questions after, well, I could probably take a few right now. We're ahead of schedule. Any questions?
Yeah, I do.
Sure.
The last train to run out of Penticton or Okanagan Falls left in what, May of 1989?
It was in 89, that's correct.
Headed to Princeton with a load of lumber. And then they changed the lumber there, picked up another load of lumber, took it up to Spence's Bridge, picked up another load of lumber, came back to Princeton, dropped that lumber off, picked up another load for the final load that came back to Okanagan Falls, and that was the end of it.
Yep, that's right. Another thing they had to do too, because it was still an active railroad line, they weren't officially abandoned. They had to stop at all the bridges and where they had big barrels, where they had to fill up for water in case there was any fires. Even though they knew they weren't going to be running any more trains, they still had to stop, and they had to fill up with whatever they had to fill up the water with. To do all that, top up all those big pails with water, just in case there was a fire. They had to do that because it was still an active line until Transport Canada said they could officially abandon. So I wish I'd been here for the last one. Were you there for that? Or?
No, but I have a video of it.
Uh-huh.
I think maybe the museum might have a video here of it.
I'm not sure.
I think it was museum, because at one of the shows at Cherry Lane a couple years ago, the gentleman had a video that he took. I think he was the engineer on the last run.
Mm-hmm.
He took it from Merritt to Oakey Falls, and I watched that. And then he said that he was going to give it to the staff at the Sycamore Museum.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened after that.
No idea, no idea. Yeah, what happened was in 1985, when CP decided to close this Penticton as a terminal, when I was here, there was 2 crews based here, 1 crew based in Merritt. So when they decided to close the terminal and abolish the jobs, they they abolished 1 crew completely, and then they moved the other crew to Merritt. So they had 2 crews in Merritt, no crews here. So the 1 crew still went to Spence's Bridge 5 days a week as they were doing, and the other crew would come over to Penticton and down to OK Falls twice a week. When they come back from OK Falls, it was going to be too long a day, so they from what I understand, they backed the train into the yard in Penticton. Some of the guys lived here, they go home for the night, and then the next day they go back to Merritt, and that was what they did until they abandoned the line. So, yes, sir?
When I came here, the train was running from Penticton to Oliver every day. And I wonder if you know when it stopped running to Vesuvius. Did it ever run to Vesuvius?
Oh, yes, they did. Yeah, their big thing was hauling fruit out there. In fact, a conductor I worked with out of Vancouver, he hired on here in 1970, and in the early 70s, he loved that job. In the summertime, they would go down early in the morning from Penticton, and they would spot these frozen cars with freezers into the warehouses where all the fruit was, and then they'd leave the cars there for about 5 or 6 hours, and the crew would take their bathing suits and towels. They'd go down to the beach for about 5 or 6 hours on pay, getting paid, and then when it was time to go and pick up the cars, then they'd go back, put their overalls on, go pick up the cars, take them back to Penticton. I don't know the exact year. It was the early 70s when we quit going south of OK Falls. And the only reason they kept going to Okanagan Falls until 1989 was because of the Weyerhaeuser Mill there. Otherwise, it would have all been gone. But it was sometime between 1970 and 1975, I believe, was when they quit going south of OK Falls.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions?
John.
Yes? Allison?
Yeah, did you ever get to say Highball Horse Creek on the Windermere side?
No, I never worked on Cranbrook was the only terminal I never worked out of. So this lady here that's speaking right now, her name is Allison. When I came out to Revelstoke, she was a train order operator in Kamloops, and she did the job in Kamloops that I did in Ontario and Quebec. And I knew her very well there. Then after that, she left CP to go to CN and became a train dispatcher. And I just noticed this morning, she sent me a thing, she gave a big shout out on Facebook with the advertisement that the museum put together, and she said, how did you say it, Allison? Go ahead.
Bring your plastic and your cash, because you'll probably have a stack of books.
I didn't say that, no. No, I didn't say that. She might have my books, but she did say you got to go. It'd be very interesting. So I really appreciate that shout out, Allison. Thank you. Yes, at the back there.
John, could you briefly touch on the provincial government's plan to decommission the KVR rail trail west of Princeton?
No, I don't think I can do that, Neil. I'm really not in a position to do that. I really don't know what they're planning. I do know the mayor of Princeton is really doing his best to keep that going. I hope they can. It's a double-edged sword. I mean, it's unfortunate what happened. It was, an act of Mother Nature, act of God. I don't know what's going to happen with that. It'd be nice to see it get fixed up. I hope it can, but I'm really not feel qualified to really answer because I'm not really sure where they're going with it. So, yes?
Going back to the rail line that ran into Midway.
Yep.
Do you know what year that was built when it started?
It was early 1900s. That's not really my era, but it was in the early 1900s. It was the main line that goes through Revelstoke and Kamloops. That was completed in 1885, and the Kettle Valley was built after that. I believe it was early 1900s, and I wish I had that, but I'm trying to focus on the last few years. But just Midway, I will tell you, one thing that really ticked the company off was, and that's what I did want to tell, and I forgot, is when they want to, I have a few minutes still. So what happened was in 1972, there was a big derailment on the main line, and I think it happened in 1968 from what I was told. They detoured all the mainline freight trains through Penticton, and for about close to 10 days, this was a very busy place. In fact, they didn't have enough men in Penticton to handle these detour trains, so Revelstoke sent a lot of their men down. They created a temporary freight pool here in Penticton. They put the guys up in hotels because it was so busy with the detour trains. And locomotives came through here you would never see. There was one picture I saw of a 6-axle CP locomotive SD40 in the front, 2 leased Bangor and a Aroostook GP9s, that's from New England, and another CP SD40 in the back. To have these American engines in Penticton would never have happened had it not been for these detours. So after that was done, somebody in Montreal, in the corporate ivory tower, head office for CP used to be in Montreal, it's in Calgary now. He had this idea, well, why don't we run the empty coal trains to free up the main line? We can't run the loads, you know, with the topography of the Kettle Valley, but why don't we run the empty coal trains from Spence's Bridge to Fort Steele that way, you know, like a directional running kind of thing. Well, nobody in Montreal agreed with them, and they didn't like that. They got nervous, so that's when they decided to abandon the Carmi subdivision between Midway and Penticton. So they want to abandon that, sever that, before this guy could really push to get the coal trains going. And so CP applied to abandon it and had all the hearings, and CP came back and said, okay, to CP, you can abandon from Beaverdale to Penticton, but you have to keep the other portion 25 or 30 miles from Midway to Beaverdale going, because there was 3 or 4 customers there that needed servicing. So CP said, oh, okay, whatever. The Nelson crew goes there twice a week and they overnight there. We'll just run them through, pay them the mileage to go there. But the unions for the locomotive engineers and the conductors said to management, no, you can't do that, because all the work between Midway and Spence's Bridge belongs to Penticton. You're going to have to use Penticton crews. Well, the company was just outraged, because once a week, when the train would reach Grand Forks coming west, the operator, the same job that Allison did and I did in Ontario, he would phone the crew clerk at the Penticton station, say the train arrived at Grand Forks, and they'd call 3 guys, a conductor, trainman, and engineer, show up 2 hours later, take a taxi to Midway, pay them 8 hours pay, 100 miles, each of them, to get on one of the engines and the cars for Beaverdale and go over there and come back, and then and the taxi waited for them for 5 hours. He waited there. Yeah. And then they would take the taxi back to Penticton. This went on for 2 years, and then I don't know how CP got out of that. And I should tell you, and thank you for bringing that question up, because you reminded me of that. So what CP did when they severed the Carmi sub, Penticton got downgraded from a run-through secondary mainline terminal to the dead-end branch line. And the only thing that really kept it going here, not that little propane place, it was the 3 Weyerhaeuser mills, Okanagan Falls, Merritt, and Princeton. So CP wanted to get out of here because the Princeton subdivision was their longest subdivision on their system across Canada, and it had a lot of challenges. I mean, as Neil just asked about the thing west of Princeton. So they got smart after the Beaverdale mistake. You know what they did? CP was sneaky. I'll hand it to them. It was very smart what they did, but it was sneaky. Before going to Transport Canada to apply to abandon the Princeton sub, they went and met with the top brass at Weyerhaeuser and said, look, we know you need to get your lumber out there. We know that, and we want to take care of you. But it's costing us too much money with taxes and all the upgrades and all the mudslides to keep that line going. If we were to build a carload center, reload center, just east of Kamloops, a place called Campbell Creek, Trans-Canada Highway goes along there, and if we were to truck your lumber up there and put them on the bulkhead flats there, and they dangled a carrot, they said, we'll pay for your trucking for 5 years. Well, Weyerhaeuser thought that was a great deal. I think it was a silly deal, but they agreed to it. So the Weyerhaeuser management went to the Transport Canada hearings, and they testified, yes, we're okay with CP abandoning the line because they've assured us they're going to truck our lumber up to Campbell Creek. So that's how they got out of that. So thank you for that question. I think we have time for a couple more. Any?
John, I got one thing.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
If you read the book McCullough's Wonder, that's got a lot of good information. Carmi sub started west from Midway in 1910, and it ended up in 1916 by Ladner Creek. They had 6 years to build it, and they had trouble trying to get steel and people because it was during the war. But I also wanted to ask Allison, did you ever hear of a guy, George Hood?
No,
He was the agent operator in Midway till they closed it.
I was an operator in Canvas and then Spill Machine, and then I went to CN, and I worked on all the scenic highlights, Blue River, Boston Bar, Ruby Creek, and then I went train dispatching, so I got another scenic highlight, Prince George dispatching train orders, and they weren't going to qualify any girls in that office, but I made it, and then I went to Motive Power Distribution, Montreal.
Okay.
Oh, right on. Okay, good. For a lady who came to me from Princeton before I start my presentation, I'd like you to come to Princeton and do the same presentation. And I said, you better listen to my presentation first. You might not like it. So if I don't see you after, then I'll know what I haven't seen her yet. Now, before you go, folks, if you want to stick around after, feel free to ask questions. during COVID, it's something I wanted to do for a long time, just never found time, but during COVID, to keep my sanity, I signed a contract with a book company in New Jersey, and I wrote and published a book about my railroad career. It's not a Kettle Valley book, but it has the Kettle Valley chapter with a lot of the photos you saw today. And I don't have any available, I don't have any for sale, but if you're you can come up and have a look at my copy here. If you'd like to order online, I can tell you how to do that. And one final thing is, after some friends of mine, and I'd like to make it open to anybody, we're going to go to the White Spot for a late lunch. They have their happy hour at 2 o'clock. If anybody would like to join us, love to have you come. On that note, I want to... What's that?
Who's paying?
You got to pay your own. I might be dumb, but I'm not stupid. Anyway, before you go, folks, just a thank you to a lot of people for coming, for all of you for coming today. But a gentleman by the name of Jordan West, who's a blogger, and you know, he's really good. I don't know if you've seen him on YouTube. Anybody that he's really promoting Penticton. Anybody that has seen his blogs on YouTube. If you don't live in Penticton, you want to pack up and move to Penticton right away. He committed to come to record today, which I really appreciate. But he sent a young lady, Larissa, in his place, and she's going to become the good blogger he is. Larissa, thank you for coming to do that today. I appreciate it. Thank you again to the Bradburns for coming today. I can't thank you. It means the world. And if you could stick around, I'd like to have a group photo with you before we go. And thank you to everybody else, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
John, thank you very much from the museum. Thank you for doing.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, thank you.
Some local honey for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yes, and again, thanks to John for his presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for coming out. We really appreciate you coming out and sharing with your friends that you came to the Brown Bag Lectures. Thank you also for your donations as they help us put on the Brown Bag Lectures. I would like to invite you for next week, if you could come. Anne Riddick will be talking about representing the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. So she will be sharing her own experiences with blindness. And that's what I was thinking about. What's the last thing I can tell you is to remind you to turn back your cell phones on. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I grew up in Lower Manhattan.